She had no idea that just for threatening to burn down these rustic beehives, the Homeowners Association President chair she was always so proud of was about to turn into a pile of ashes. You have exactly 24 hours to clear out this garbage. If not, I will personally call a chemical tanker truck to burn it down. Brenda tapped the stack of folders embossed with the Homeowners Association logo against the fence, her heels striking harshly against the white gravel. The smell of her heavily sprayed perfume rushed into the air, overpowering even the pungent smell of the bee smoker. Arthur did not look up. The chisel blade in his hand pressed firmly and slid along the edge of the wooden frame. The thick excess beeswax crumbled, falling with a rustling sound onto the ground. The sound of metal scraping against wood rang out steadily sharp, completely unaffected by the screaming in his ear. He placed the wax frame down on the edge of the box, looked at the bees, then looked at her. No. Brenda tilted her head, slightly blinking behind her horn-rimmed glasses. You do not understand who you are talking to, Arthur, she hissed, pushing the gate and stepping fully inside. The new regulations on uniform landscaping have been issued. She glanced at the plot of land bordering the forest, her eyes flashing with cunning calculation, as if she were secretly appraising every square meter of land instead of looking at the swarm of bees. The safe distance of hundreds of feet to the nearest neighbor's house was completely and deliberately ignored by her. Arthur took off his thick protective gloves. He stepped back exactly one step, the toe of his shoe touching the very edge of the faded, crushed stone path that divided the front yard and the back garden. He pointed his finger to the ground, then slowly pointed straight out to the wide open gate. Not a single word of explanation, not a single sentence of justification about ownership rights. His absolute cold silence choked the jumble of arguments that were about to spill from Brenda's lips. She stepped back instinctively, her face flushing with anger at that terrifying non-cooperation. Conversation over, Arthur muttered, turning his back and walking straight up the wooden steps. Through the side window, he watched Brenda huffily return to her car. She had already pressed her telephone to her ear, even before sitting in the driver's seat. Arthur glanced at the clock on the wall. 4:14 in the afternoon. He opened the drawer of his desk, taking out a brand new small black notebook. Opening to the first page, he held his pen, carefully recording in his firm handwriting. 16:14. Brenda encroached on the boundary for the first time, threat of destruction. The very moment the pen cap clicked shut, the sentence for the new Homeowners Association president officially began. 2 days later, a bright yellow envelope was tightly sealed with industrial tape right in the middle of Arthur's front door. Inside was a penalty notice, printed on Homeowners Association letterhead, accompanied by an invoice for $500. Reason for violation, Article 12B, keeping swarm creatures that threaten community safety. The accompanying order required him to personally remove all the beehives within 48 hours. If not, the management board would hire a third party to enforce the removal and charge all expenses to his account. Arthur ran his eyes over the paper. His facial expression did not change in the slightest. Ever since Brenda took office almost 2 months ago, the atmosphere in Pinecrest Meadows had always been as tense as a stretched string. From his porch, Arthur had seen her driving her electric cart on patrol every morning, gripping a measuring tape to measure the height of the grass at house number 42, or personally tearing down a hanging flower pot that was in the wrong color palette in front of house number 18. But Brenda's imposition did not just stop at petty tricks. Yesterday morning, while standing and fixing his front steps, Arthur noticed that the neighborhood's familiar landscaping team of 10 years had disappeared. In its place was a closed box truck with no logo, spewing thick smoke and parking abruptly in front of the Homeowners Association's guardhouse. The new workers worked aggressively and carelessly, using a trimmer to shred the communal hibiscus strip instead of pruning it. When complained to by residents, the team leader lifted his chin and declared himself the exclusive contractor appointed personally by the new president. Coincidentally, this month's landscaping maintenance fee had just been pushed up by an additional 30%. Arthur folded the penalty notice, brought it into his study room, and turned on the old copper desk lamp. He pulled open the bottom drawer of his rusty metal cabinet. Inside were not the blurry photocopied rules that Brenda often stuffed into residents' mailboxes. It was the original archive file of the residential area with the sunken red seal of the county office that he had requested an extract of 6 months ago. Arthur's calloused fingers slid slowly over each line of text, cross-checking it with the penalty paper. Article 12, a regulations on domestic waste. Article 12C, noise standard after 10 o'clock at night. There was absolutely no Article 12B. Brenda was not just abusing her power. She was fabricating laws, arbitrarily printing them on documents in the name of the organization to threaten and legitimize the eviction of his bee colony. Arthur did not pick up the telephone to call and question her. He did not knock on Brenda's door to argue. He quietly placed the forged penalty paper neatly next to the county's original document, carefully smoothing the edges of the two papers so they were parallel to each other. He opened the black-covered notebook. Right below the note, from 4:14 in the afternoon of the previous day, he neatly wrote another line, Day 3, Forged Penalty Notice. Intentional document fraud. That afternoon, Arthur drove his old pickup truck out of town. When he returned, the truck bed had a few more small toolboxes. In the gathering darkness of the dusk, the sound of a drill rang out dryly. From the main road, no one could see the elderly man silently screwing in 3 camouflaged infrared security cameras, aligning the recording angles to point straight at the fence boundary where the beehives were placed. Brenda wanted to use rules to force compliance. Arthur would let her do that, but she had no idea that at this boundary, every arrogant action was being recorded into an irreversible sentence. By the weekend, 3 envelopes sealed with red tape appeared continuously. One was roughly wedged under the windshield wiper of his pickup truck. 2 were stuffed tightly into the slot of his mailbox. The total accumulated penalty amount suddenly jumped to $5,000. Every notice cited some strange type of fee that had just been created overnight. Ecological spreading risk fee, landscaping disruption compensation cost. Brenda was using paperwork like a noose, hoping that the massive financial pressure would make a retired old man panic and yield. Arthur peeled open the envelopes. He did not tear them. He stapled them all together into a neat stack, dropped them into the drawer, and slammed it shut. But Brenda did not stop at terrorizing with paperwork. She began to attack the only thing he had left, his connection with the community. On Wednesday evening, a post appeared on the Pinecrest neighborhood Facebook group. It did not mention him by name, but attached a photo secretly taken from a distance pointing toward Arthur's fence. A selfish resident is harboring a nest of assassin bugs, directly threatening the lives of our children. The management board will use the strongest measures to uproot this tumor. Let us protect the children. Below were dozens of angry icons from anonymous accounts and a few easily manipulated residents. The next morning, when Arthur carried his trash can out to the curb, Miss Sarah from house number 12, the young neighbor who still happily waved to him every morning, jumped in startlement. She hastily pulled her 5-year-old son's arm, hard, dragging him backward toward the other side of the street, her eyes looking at him shiftily, full of fear. The boy clumsily dropped his toy car, but his mother did not dare to stop and pick it up. Arthur froze. His eyes darkened. His usual calmness rippled slightly. Brenda's virtual power had truly begun to poison this neighborhood. He turned back into the house, opened the black notebook. His handwriting pressed so hard it indented through the surface of the paper. Day 6. Slander, dividing the community. The truly suffocating pressure came at 4 o'clock in the afternoon on the 7th day, just a dozen hours before the enforcement deadline that Brenda had set for herself. The roar of a diesel engine shattered the silence of the garden. Through the screen from the hidden security camera, Arthur saw an opaque white tanker truck park abruptly right in front of the barrier gate. On the body of the truck was printed a bright red scorpion logo, Absolute Pest Extermination Service. From the passenger seat, Brenda stepped down. This time she did not go alone. The man accompanying her wore fully sealed protective gear, aggressively pulling down from the truck bed an industrial chemical sprayer and a long, dangling hose. Dust flew up blindly under the tires. Brenda crossed her arms, smiling triumphantly as she stared at Arthur's tightly closed wooden door. She was in no hurry to order the spraying. She parked the chemical truck there like a guillotine that had been hoisted high intentionally, flaunting her power, forcing her target to endure a long, desperate night, waiting for the final blow at dawn. She thought he was hiding in the house, trembling and helpless, watching the wooden boxes about to be burned down. But Arthur did not look out the window at all. I was sitting at his desk, the light from the computer screen reflecting on his ice-cold face. On the screen was the business registration record of the pest extermination company that had just parked outside the gate. Scrolling down to the legal representative line, a familiar name appeared. It perfectly matched the owner of the new landscaping care company that Brenda had just signed an exclusive contract with a few weeks ago. A rare, sharp, cold half-smile flashed across his lips. The final puzzle piece had fit. Arthur picked up the telephone, dialing a short sequence of numbers. The other end of the line picked up after 2 rings. Captain Miller. Arthur said in a deep, steady voice. They set the trap exactly as we predicted. Tomorrow morning, I need you to be present at the community hall. The clock struck 1:15 in the morning. The laser printer in the corner of the study room screeched in dry, rhythmic beats. Arthur stood in the darkness, carefully picking up each sheet of paper that had just been spat out, checking the sharpness of every letter. The first sheet, the business registration record of the new landscaping company hired by the Homeowners Association. The second sheet, the operating license of the pest extermination company parked looming outside the gate. Both legal entities registered the exact same address. The exact same representative, Richard Vance, Brenda's brother-in-law. Her plan was not to enforce the rules. It was a closed loop of money, finding to force residents to remove their property, then pouring the Homeowners Association funds into her family member's pocket to recreate the landscaping. Arthur stapled the two sheets of paper together. He pulled his chair back, dragging out from the bottom of his safe a worn leather-wrapped cylinder. Inside was a yellowed cadastral drawing from 1982 and the original land use right certificate roll. On the third page, under the zoning exceptions section, there was a paragraph of text embossed with the state government's seal, confirming that the area bordering the forest of his house was permanently a private ecological conservation zone, not subject to the governance of any civil regulations formed after it. Brenda wanted to use Homeowners Association law to crush him. She had no idea this garden lay outside the coverage area of that mess of rules. But dealing with an arrogant person, merely defending was not enough. Arthur pulled the final document out of the drawer, a thick stack of files, the top edge printed with the red seal logo of the National Pollinator Ecological Conservation Project. Documents proving the 15 beehives out in the garden were not merely personal property. They were ecological monitoring stations provided with strictly protected codes by the federal government. He gathered everything together, smoothed them out flat, and slid them into a transparent plastic envelope. Clicked the lock button. Everything was ready for the community meeting at 8 o'clock in the morning. 2:45 in the morning. Arthur turned off the desk lamp. He stepped out into the living room, slumping down into the old velvet-upholstered armchair. His rough hand gently touched the wooden picture frame on the tea table, the photograph of Catherine smiling radiantly amidst a vast field of wildflowers. Outside the window, the sallow flashing yellow lights from the roof of the pest extermination truck were still sweeping grotesque streaks across the wall of the house. Arthur looked at those streaks of light. For the first time since this mess began, a chill ran down the former engineer's spine. His paperwork was perfect. The legal net was tightly woven, but the law needed time to be brought to light, while chemicals would destroy in a split second. A dark shadow separated from the truck cabin, walking toward the barrier fence. The exterminator was lighting a cigarette. He stared intently at the garden, his hand patting the high-pressure spray hose dangling on the side of the truck. The distance from the nozzle to the nearest beehive was barely less than 10 meters. Arthur tightened his two hands on the arms of the chair. His usual calmness gave way to genuine fear. If that guy received a text message ordering him to spray the chemicals right tonight, everything would turn to dust. When Captain Miller walked in tomorrow morning, the federal certificates would only be scrap paper. His promise to Catherine would die along with the tens of thousands of tiny living beings out there. That night, Arthur did not sleep a wink. He sat motionless in the darkness like a statue, his sharp gaze pinned tightly outside the window, guarding every breath of the bee colony until the first ray of sunlight of Judgment Day slashed across the sky. 8:15 in the morning. The neighborhood community hall was packed with people. The air was thick with tension and gloomy whispers. On the central podium, Brenda stood with a straight back in a neat suit. The projector screen behind her displayed an image of Arthur's garden circled with a bright red X. On the table was an emergency enforcement order paper waiting ready for a signature. Community safety has no room for selfish exceptions, Brenda declared loudly into the microphone, glancing around the hall. The extermination team is waiting for my order right outside the gate. The moment I sign this paper, the neighborhood's tumor will be cleaned out. She pulled the cap off her gold-plated fountain pen. Right at that moment, the double doors of the hall opened. Arthur stepped in. I was not breathless, did not shout. He took slow, steady strides along the main aisle, holding the transparent plastic envelope in his hand. All eyes poured toward the former engineer. Brenda smirked. Too late, Arthur. You no longer have the right to vote here. Arthur did not reply. He walked straight up to the podium, quietly opening the envelope. contrary to everyone's expectation of a pathetic begging scene. He pulled out 3 sheets of paper and spread them flat on the wooden table surface, right next to Brenda's hand. The sound of paper rubbing rang out, rustling cold. "Before you throw our fund money away, I think you should explain about this," Arthur said, his volume just enough to slip into the microphone. His finger tapped lightly on the business registration paper. "The new landscaping company and the pest extermination service parked out there. Both are registered under the name Richard Vance." Arthur looked up, staring piercingly into Brenda's eyes. "Your brother-in-law." The hall of 50 people suddenly erupted into a clamor of voices. A few residents half stood up. Brenda's face stiffened. The corner of her lips twitched slightly, but her blinding arrogance still made her try to salvage it. You are distracting us, regardless of who the contractor is. You have violated Homeowners Association regulations on residential land. I still have the right to clear out your garbage." She gritted her teeth, pressing the pen tip hard onto the paper surface, intending to sign. "You have no jurisdiction over that piece of land." Arthur's voice rang out, cutting off her action. He pulled out the second piece of paper, the yellowed cadastral map. "That piece of land has an exemption clause from 1982. Your Homeowners Association has never had jurisdiction over that area, but—" Arthur paused for half a beat. He slid the final piece of paper to the very top, the paper with the red embossed seal of the federal government. "But the federal government does." At the same time, the hall doors opened again. Captain Miller stepped in wearing his full police uniform. He did not say a word, just quietly walked over, crossing his arms and leaning his back against the wall right next to the doorway, his eyes locked tightly onto the female president. The air in the room seemed to be drained completely. "The 15 beehives out there are not pets," Arthur said gently, each word dropping like a hammer strike. "They are research assets belonging to the National Ecological Conservation Project. They are protected." Arthur leaned forward in front of Brenda, lowering his voice, enough for the microphone to catch every single distinct syllable. "The federal sentence for the crime of intentionally destroying national conservation property is 5 years in prison and a $50,000 fine, not even counting the crime of breach of trust and defrauding community funds." He pushed his telephone toward her, the screen already displaying the call button. "Do you want to personally call in the order to spray the chemicals, or let your brother-in-law be the one to take the blame instead?" 1, 2, 3 seconds of absolute silence. The large hall did not have even a single heavy breath. Brenda's arrogance shattered right on the speaking podium. Her lips moved, but could not utter any sound. The blood color drained completely from her face, leaving behind a layer of skin as pale white as scratch paper. The hand holding the pen trembled violently. Clack! The gold-plated fountain pen slipped from her red-painted fingers, rolling, tumbling across the table's surface, then falling straight down onto the floor. The clattering sound of the fountain pen rolling on the wooden floor completely broke the membrane of silence. The crowd woke up. The bewildered whispers quickly turned into a noisy wave of outrage. A few people stood right up, pointing their fingers straight at the podium. Captain Miller only now detached himself from the wall. He took slow strides toward the center, gently pushing the emergency enforcement order paper to one side. "Madam Chadwick," the local police officer's voice rang out evenly, carrying no emotion. "I am afraid this meeting will have to be paused. We need you to unlock the management board office and hand over all revenue and expenditure ledgers from the past 60 days to serve the investigation." Brenda stepped back, her shoulders slumping down as if her entire proud skeletal frame had just been drained. She could not utter a single word, trudging down from this podium under the dozens of contemptuous gazes of the neighbors she had once bullied. Within just 20 minutes, an emergency recall vote was conducted right on the spot, 100% in favor. The plan to take over the landscaping fund by Brenda and her sibling officially ended before it even had time to begin. 3 days later, a pure white envelope without red tape was carefully placed into Arthur's mailbox. Inside was a check refunding the entire absurd penalty amount of $5,000, along with a document signed by the interim management board. The content permanently confirmed the exemption right of the beekeeping area from all Homeowners Association regulations. The representative of the new management board, a sheepish middle-aged man, stood waiting ready outside the gate. Arthur stepped out, running his eyes over the paper. He folded it up, tucking it into his breast pocket. "We are truly sorry for what Brenda did, Arthur." The man hesitated. "From now on, there will not be any more nuisance." Arthur gave a slight nod. His facial expression showed no look of triumph, nor was there any easy forgiveness. His eyes were still cold as he looked straight at the representative. I accept this apology, but remember well that crushed stone boundary line is not just a decoration. If anyone on the management board still has the intention of stepping over that natural fence once again, I will not just bring paperwork to a meeting. The man hastily gave a mechanical nod, then stepped back to his car. Sunday morning. Everything returned to its exactly inherent, tranquil appearance. The hideous pest extermination truck had disappeared. Around Arthur's garden, the morning sunlight spread evenly over the rustic wooden boxes. The music of nature hummed resonantly again steadily, tirelessly. Arthur stood outside the barrier fence, holding in his hand a small tray arranged with pieces of fresh, bright yellow honeycomb, dripping the sweetest and most pristine honey. A few children in the neighborhood gathered around closely, eagerly reaching out their hands to receive it. From across the street, Sarah walked over holding her 5-year-old son's hand. She no longer dragged the child backward like a few days ago. Her eyes were filled with embarrassment and remorse. The boy sheepishly stepped forward, holding out a paper drawn with wax crayons. On it was a picture of a plump bee distorted but overflowing with bright yellow patches of color. Arthur slowly squatted down. He took off his thick protective gloves, using his calloused hands to receive the drawing in an extremely respectful manner. The corner of the former engineer's lips twitched slightly, forming the first genuine smile since the story began. A boundary is not just lines drawn on a zoning map or wooden stakes planted deep underground. It is a record of respect, power. Borrowing, the name of rules, is ultimately just a fragile type of illusion, using noisiness to hide emptiness. As for truth and nature, though silent one way or another, always know how to protect themselves. And those who intentionally step over that boundary, sooner or later, will lock themselves into a trap set by their own making.